Hello, today I will be talking about the books that I read in May. First up, I finished Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. I actually started reading this in April over Easter because I was at my parents' house where most of my books still are, and I decided I would start reading Jane Austen's works in order of when she wrote them. So although Northanger Abbey was published after her death, it was the first novel that she completed. I have this very random secondhand copy that I got from a secondhand bookshop ages and ages ago, so the cover isn't even on Goodreads, but I kind of like it. The pulpy kind of 60s look goes along with Jane Austen's joke about pulpy fiction in this book. I've read Jane Austen's books once through before, probably when I was about 14 or 15, long enough ago that I don't remember my exact opinions on each book in terms of the writing and the story within the book, but because I've seen the adaptations of every novel aside from Mansfield Park many times, I feel like I know these stories thoroughly anyway. So part of my reread is just because I want to reread her books because they're amazing, and another part of it is to go back to the original texts and see exactly which stories are my favorites. Austen is instantly so adept at characterization. I think that's the first thing that you notice when reading Jane Austen. Every single one of these characters you could meet now in a similar guise. For example, the character of Mr. Thorpe, who bangs on and on to the protagonist Catherine about his horses and his vehicles. You know, there are so many people like that person right now who bang on and on about their cars or something similar. I also especially love the character of Mrs. Allen, who is Catherine's guardian while she's staying in Bath. She is a very kind and lovely person, and Jane Austen is able to portray that while at the same time showing that she's kind of thoughtless, only really cares about her clothes. And that subtlety of characterization is amazing to read and also creates some hilarious moments. I think my favourite part of this whole book is when Mrs. Allen discovers that Mr. Tilney knows muslin, and she's so impressed at a man knowing about women's clothing and about fabrics. That one scene probably made Mr. Tilney my favourite Jane Austen love interest. I realised I've just jumped straight in without saying what the plot is, but basically this is about a young girl called Catherine, I think she's about 17, who has grown up in the country with a large family and goes on holiday to Bath with her neighbours and friends Mr. and Mrs. Allen. There she meets Mr. and Miss Tilney, who are a lovely brother and sister of a very noble family, and she also meets the Thorpes and becomes best friends with one of the daughters, Isabella. The book is best known for being a send-up of Gothic novels that were very popular at the time, and Catherine gets into trouble when she starts believing that the things she's read about in novels could actually be true. And I wonder whether Austen, when writing this book, was fully just joking around, or whether she was trying to say that a story doesn't need skeletons in the closet and murders and Gothic castles to be interesting. I think because the plot is relatively uncomplicated, this book is considered not one of Austen's greatest novels, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had such a great time reading this that I can't even imagine how she's going to surpass herself in later novels, even though I know that she does. Next, I finished A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I've been reading this book on and off since February, and then in May kind of decided I would sit down and finally finish it off. Not because it's a particularly hard book to read, but because it is an incredibly long book. It's kind of weird to say that I enjoyed this book because a lot of traumatic things happened, but I can definitely say I was engaged by this book. At the beginning, it's about four friends, Jude, Willem, Malcolm and JB, as 20-somethings living in New York, and they all have various aspirations. Jude is training to be a lawyer, Willem wants to be an actor, Malcolm an architect, and JB an artist. The book ends up following Jude more than the others, but it does follow all their lives well into their 60s, I think it is. Thinking back on the reading experience, it kind of felt like the first part of the book was almost a different kind of book to the second half, but then that may be just because I read them so far apart. I really enjoyed the first bit where it's kind of a meandering story which very fluidly goes into flashbacks, and each character apart from Jude at the beginning gets their own point of view, so you find out about their childhoods and learn what kind of people they are. Because Jude is not given a point of view, he's this almost mysterious character right at the beginning, but then he becomes the sole focus of the book and we are almost constantly in his head aside from a few breaks. And these parts could have been repetitive, but somehow I still found them quite easy to read. When I was reading interviews with the author afterwards, I found out she didn't actually do any research. And it sort of comes back to that old age question of whether authors have to write only what they know, or whether they can just make anything up, and are there consequences to that if they do just make stuff up. And imagine how someone might feel, for example, when they are sexually assaulted as a child. I think this book gets away with that in terms of the reading experience because because everything is written so matter-of-factly that it doesn't feel like anything is being sensationalized, though maybe that way of writing it matter-of-factly is the author's way of getting away with something that she has put in the book to be something that is sensationalist. It's weird. I was so involved in this book for so long, and then having finished it a month ago, I don't really remember what I felt about it. I guess for me this was one of those stories that I was fully engaged with and engaged with the characters at the time, but it's not something that stayed with me. Next, I read Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. I absolutely loved My Year of Rest and Relaxation last year, and so was really excited to read her first novel, which was the one that was nominated for the Man Booker Prize. However, I was a bit disappointed in this book. I did not find myself engaged with it nearly as much as My Year of Rest and Relaxation. It was one of those books that I felt like I enjoyed in theory, but in the execution found it lacking. So this is about a young woman called Eileen. Well, she's a young woman in the 60s, but the narration is her as an older woman looking back on her life then. I think this was the aspect of the book that annoyed me the most, because the older Eileen tended to do a lot of foreshadowing. She tended to tell us who she was rather than show us who she was as a young person. I do wonder whether Moshfegh was trying to show that the older Eileen was unaware of exactly how she came across as a young person, because the way she would describe herself didn't seem to me to quite match up with the way that she acted. Eileen is living with her father, who is a drunk who stays in their house all the time, and she works at a boys' prison doing some kind of administrative work. She's very miserable and dreams of running away all the time, and kind of spends her day having crushes on the male guards in the prison. The bits I did really like about the book were the way it examined the way that society told women they should be these delicate, beautiful flowers, and how inconsistent that is with the way Eileen saw her own body as something quite disgusting. Another woman begins to work at the prison, who is this young, beautiful lady called Rebecca, and Eileen becomes obsessed with her, and I felt like the story definitely picked up when that character arrived. It was a short book, but I felt like first 2/3 were very repetitive and kind of boring, and then stuff happens in the last third of the book that was really enjoyable to read. So in the end, I thought it was a worthwhile read. It was really interesting to almost go backwards with Moshfegh's writing, and definitely see how, personally, I think she's improved so much with the second novel compared to the first one. So next, the Australian election happened, and the Conservative government was elected once again, despite the fact that they keep refugees in terrible conditions on an island and will refuse to do anything about climate change, and in fact want to build more coal-fired power stations. So that was really depressing, and I decided I would return to a childhood favourite to make me feel slightly better, and it actually worked, so that was nice. The power of fiction is amazing. So this is actually the copy of Little Princess that I got for my 8th birthday. I remember it was my 8th because on the back of the book it says for ages 9 and up, and I remember joking that I wasn't quite old enough for this book yet. You can tell it is very old and worn, and that the spine has been faded from sitting in the sun, but I still love this copy, and it has really cute illustrations inside. So A Little Princess is about a girl called Sarah Crew. She doesn't have a mother. She has a father who is a captain in the army stationed in India. So she grew up in India, and as about a 6-year-old, I think, is now coming to Britain to be educated in a boarding school. She is a very peculiar little girl. She's very thoughtful and adult, and loves imagining things and telling stories. And despite the fact that she is spoiled rotten, she continues to be an incredibly lovely, generous person, which the headmistress of the boarding school does not like, because she is greedy and doesn't understand Sarah's ways at all. Something happens where her father dies and loses all their money, and Sarah has no other relations in the world. So this headmistress decides to basically use her as a servant, and so it is a complete riches to rags story. Reading this now kind of makes sense of my entire childhood. Like, I can see how I tried to model myself to be Sarah Crew. Like, I desperately wanted to either be her or be her friend. I thought she was the most wonderful character ever created. The way she uses her imagination with everything was something that I would always do as a kid. Even just a walk to the shops, I had to pretend that it was something else. Nothing could be what it was. It always had to be something imagined and something better than real life. I also loved it because it features both extreme wealth and extreme poverty, and I mean, that sounds kind of awful to say that I liked that, but as a child, when you live, I guess, in a middle class family, both those things are incredibly fascinating to you, of course. So in the confines of a children's book, it was really fascinating to read about someone who had everything becoming someone who has absolutely nothing, and yet Sarah still continues to be the amazingly calm and thoughtful person that she is. There's definitely room, I think, in this book to make an adaptation that touches more upon the imperial India aspect of the novel and delves into a bit more depth about that, while also retaining the sort of amazing magical fairy princess story. I feel like anyone who loves children's classics has already read this, but if you haven't, I strongly urge you to read it. I feel like this was just made for anyone who was a child who loves stories. Lastly, I read Room for a Stranger by Melanie Cheng. Melanie Cheng wrote Australia Day, which was one of my favourite books last year and is the only short story collection I've ever enjoyed. She's an Australian writer, and this book is about an old lady called Meg who lives in Melbourne in an inner city suburb. She lives there alone. She was never married as she had to care for her sick mother and also her sick younger sister, who are both dead now. So she decides that she's going to invite a foreign student to come and live with her as part of a program that she signed up for. The student who comes to live with her is Andy, who is from Hong Kong and is studying medicine at the University of Melbourne, and the book flips perspectives between Meg and Andy as they both struggle between cultural barriers and age barriers and try and work out how to live with each other. I really loved both these characters. They both have such individual voices. The best bits of the book are definitely where they're interacting, and because of seeing both their perspectives, you know that they have the potential to be friends, but the differences between them make it difficult for them to be able to communicate these similarities to each other. It's just such a lovely, slow-paced book about people and about Melbourne as well, and I think it's a book about realizing that there are more similarities between people than there are differences. So that's all I read in May. Please let me know if you have any thoughts on these books in the comments below, and I will see you soon. Bye!